Nā mana ina reo, nā kārangatanga maha e te motu nei, kia ora koutou katoa. Ko waio, ko maunga haruru, ko taki timu te waka, ko Ngāti Kahungunu te iwi, ko Ngāti Tū te hapu, ko Tangoia te marae, ko Kerri Nuku tōku ingoa, he Kaiwhakahaere Tōpūtanga Tapuhi Kaitiaki o Aotearoa. Thank you, Michael, for such a warm welcome and greetings. I first of all want to start by paying respect to the Indigenous people across the lands and seas and pay tribute and respect to elders past and present. I'd like to acknowledge Michael for the invitation so warmly presented when we met last in Singapore. Such a whirlwind meeting, but has had long-reaching contact and engagement, and it warms my heart and I'm privileged. I'd like to acknowledge the Canadian Nurses Association for the invitation to participate in such a brave and courageous step, often talking about Indigenous health and well-being often challenges us. So the opportunity to be open around discovering a new journey is incredibly humbling. To our Indigenous brothers and sisters and to your country, I want to acknowledge your tragic loss, the mamae, the hurt and the pain for the children that were discovered and taken before their time. Haere, haere, haere atu rā. As I said, it's a privilege to join you here today, especially as we mark the National Indigenous Peoples Day in Canada and the summer solstice, the return to the light, or as I read, the return of the earth and the preparation for cultivation, the celebration of spiritual consciousness through the strength and joining together. As we embark in Aotearoa on what we celebrate in the next few months is Matariki, where we acknowledge the cluster of stars believed to have emerged from Tawhiri Mātia, the god of weather. These clusters were used traditionally as points of navigation and the timing of the seasons. So it's time for us to acknowledge and pay tribute our own discovery, our own recognition. Matariki for Māori, for Indigenous peoples of Aotearoa, is a time to stop. All the whirlwind that we had last year with COVID-19 and all the preparedness, Matariki is a time to stop, reflect on the year that has been, acknowledge those that have passed as we move forward in positive energies into the future, into the year ahead. It's often a time where we consider turning of the soil in preparation for cultivation. And I saw similarities in the Indigenous meaning of the summer solstice, which really highlighted the innate interconnectedness and the relationship that we have not only in the physical beings, but our connectedness with the earth, with the whenua, with the sea, the lands and the animals, which is intrinsic in our whakapapa. We are one of the same. So in preparation for today's speech or kōrero, conversation, I really want to acknowledge those past, present, as we plan for what the future looks like for nursing and Indigenous nursing. The conversation this morning started with the opening from our kaumātua, our elder, Keelan Ransfield. And it was an acknowledgement, a blessing to celebrate the opening of such a significant event. My name is Kerri Nuku. I'm the Kaiwhakahaere for Tōpūtanga Tapuhi Kaitiaki o Aotearoa. My maunga is maunga haruru. As part of our opening, we always acknowledge from where we've come. So in my opening address, I acknowledge the fact that my maunga is maunga haruru. My waka is Takitimu. My tribe is Ngāti Kahungunu, and my sub-tribe is Ngāti Tū, and our ancestral place of meeting is Tangoia Marae. That's significant because as Māori, it gives us grounding, it gives us identity, and it connects us directly with our tipuna, whose shoulders we stand on today. But as the Kaiwhakahaere for a predominantly mainstream organisation, we represent 52,000 nurses throughout Aotearoa, New Zealand. Of that, we have almost 4,000 Indigenous nurses. We are the largest organisation that represents the largest Indigenous workforce, which is made up of registered nurses, midwives, tauira or students, and also healthcare assistants or kaimahi hauora. We are both excuse me, my throat's slightly early in New Zealand. We are both a professional body linked to the International Council of Nurses, and that's where I had the pleasure of meeting Michael. We're also a union, so connected and affiliated to our National Council of Unions. And also part of that is our connection with the Global Nurses United. We are both a professional arm and a union, as I've said, which comes with its own struggles. But we are predominantly the largest workforce in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And our role, we see it, is to protect the integrity of nursing and to ensure that our members, as part of the organisation, have the benefits and luxury of being free to care and proud to nurse. That is the vision for our organisation. But being free to care and very proud to nurse is really challenging in these times, especially across the globe as we face a pandemic crisis, but also the freedoms to be a nurse in Aotearoa has come with its struggles, especially an Indigenous nurse in Aotearoa. My speech today, the presentation, will cover a couple of three main areas that I'd like to explore in some more detail. As part of our history, we can't go far as Indigenous nurses without acknowledging our leaders, our previous predecessors that have come before us and forged the way forward for us. So I want to spend a couple of moments reflecting on the skills and attributes that three significant leaders have contributed to where we are today. I also wanted to touch on some legal challenges that we've made, which have been about asserting our rights as Indigenous peoples and our obligations of the Crown, the government, around protecting the interests of our Indigenous people and of our Indigenous workforce. And I also want to conclude by looking at the strength and how that has improved in creating a safer place for us, not just as nurses and Indigenous nurses, but hopefully for our communities. So the opening song that you heard wasn't me singing, unfortunately, but what it was is historical pictures of the fights and the plights that Māori Indigenous people to Aotearoa have had to endure. The land marches, when land was confiscated during colonisation, and we were, as Indigenous people, displaced from our lands. The land march that happened in 1975 by Dame Whina Cooper, a march from the far north of this, our North Island, right down to our government in Wellington. The largest march that galvanised a political position for Māori that previously never really existed. There are figures in there that historically tell the story through pictures whenever we have had to rise up. It has always been for a common cause, to protect our ancestral land, to fight for the rights of our Indigenous people. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have a treaty, Te Treaty of Waitangi, that was signed in 1840. A paper document, but nonetheless, a contract from Māori and then the Crown to ensure that Māori interests were protected and mana motohake, our ability to govern ourselves, was preserved. and our ability to self-determine and our leadership be self-determinating. Tēnō rangatiratanga was deeply entrenched in Te Tiriti of Waitangi, the Crown's obligation, therefore, to ensure that Māori are not disadvantaged, that Māori are treated equally, that there is a sharing of power between Crown and their relationship with Māori, who were the first people in Aotearoa. So many of our challenges for the rights to good health, for the rights to be treated as equals as Indigenous nurses, for our rights to have our land back, for our rights to be able to speak our language, te reo, primarily have been because of the breaches of the Crown's commitment to uphold Te Tiriti of Waitangi. So nursing, as part of our legislative challenges, have been very much the heart of our challenge, has been to uphold and to preserve our ability to self-determine, our obligations of the Crown, to ensure that we have that right, that strength and that mana. So the video that we showed not just the fight against land confiscations, the redefining of who owns the foreshore and seabed, the challenges around sacred lands. But there's also images there of nurses fighting to get recognised in terms of payment equal to their peers that work within district health boards. And I'll explain that more once we get into some of the legislative challenges. So our history has been really marked by having to hikoi. What you'll see in the image is a lot of Māori coming together for a common cause and a peaceful movement. We call it a hikoi, some might call it a march, police might call it a protest, but it's a peaceful coming together to show united collective strength and solidarity for a common cause. It's unfortunate that we have to do that, but it is a way as Indigenous peoples that we work collectively. So Aotearoa clean green image is not without its faults. Some might say we're a lot more progressive than other countries. We have a lot more rights than other Indigenous peoples, but it doesn't come without persistence. And at that, it doesn't come without cost. I want to pause for a moment there and talk about our history in Aotearoan nursing. And like many, I'm sure, Florence Nightingale is synonymous nationally, internationally, with nursing. Her work, her writings, her contributions to the soldiers and healthcare during the Crimean War is extensively captured and documented. Her voice, her stories, and her influences are still present in some form in our healthcare system today. The first international association in healthcare workers and a federation of over 119 national nursing associations, the International Council of Nurses, is devoted to a legacy of Florence Nightingale and sponsor the International Nurses Day, a celebration that we celebrate here on the 12th of May each year in recognition of her birthday. The history of nursing in Aotearoa is well documented. Grace Neal, a major advocate for professional nursing, and after 2 years of campaigning, she introduced our Nurses Registration Act in 2001. That was enacted. Then we had Ellen Dougherty, who was the world's first registered nurse, followed by Hester McLean, who was very powerful and very much influenced her role and her assertions following a very Florence Nightingale approach. Unfortunately, McLean's views on Māori women as nurses was not always correct, and she didn't acknowledge nurses, Māori nurses' authority and the mana, the strength of Māori within their own communities. She had incorrect assumptions about the gender relations within Māori society, believing that Māori women were unable to wield sufficient authority, and her views of Māori often trivialise the importance of the role that we play within community, let alone the influence that we can have in improving health. But our early history in nursing Aotearoa was strongly influenced by Florence Nightingale. And there are many writings of Florence Nightingale between Governor Grey that undermined the integrity and actual fact of not just Māori nurses, but Māori in general. So as Māori nurses, our organisation acknowledges Ākinihi. We acknowledge her because she trained under a Western model that was available, a Western model of nursing. And her primary role was to go out in the community and to mop their brow as our people died from typhoid epidemic after epidemic. The challenge for Ākinihi was that that wasn't nursing, that wasn't caring, and it challenged her personal views of hauora Māori, of caring for our people in a way that embraced their spiritual, their connectedness with the land, the whenua, their use of the language. So we celebrate Ākinihi as our pioneering nurse leader, because although she was trained under a Western model, she was conflicted when it came to working with her people. And she was, in her writings, talked about the challenges there were being Māori and working under a Western model. And despite all her training, when she went back into the community, she would embrace the use of the rongoa, of Māori medicines, and she would communicate with our people. And we believe she was pivotal, along with other early Māori nursing pioneers, that stopped the death of many of our people, the assimilation of our people, due to the impact of the pandemics that were ravaging through our communities. So we celebrate people like Ākinihi because of the strength that she showed against a system that was not yet ready for her. In a time in the 1900s, when it took a lot of strength to stand up again and again to the forces and the conformment of a system. Ākinihi is also celebrated, and we acknowledge every second year recipients of our Ākinihi Award because of the contributions that they've made to community, because of the stamina, the resilience and the resistance that they've had around changing who you are to meet a system or approach. We believe, as members of our governance board and our Māori members, that we are Māori first. We are Māori Indigenous wahine who happen to be a nurse, or happen to be a healthcare assistant, or happen to be a doctor. It's important for us that we don't lose sight of that. And Ākinihi and her strength taught us that. Another significant person who has formed and shaped our nursing strength has been Princess Tapuhi. Princess Tapuhi is a phenomenal woman, and she was a princess in the Kingitanga movement. The Kingitanga movement was a movement in Waikato, one of our regions up north, largely replicated of the royal family, I guess you could say, from England. And that was an attempt to try and achieve some political standing after the colonial forces had invaded and stole thousands of acres, thousands upon thousands of prime land in the 1880s, which meant that her people were displaced. Their land was lost. So her people were forced from their traditional lands, and she spent her lifetime dedicating to regaining the land, to giving her people the right to stand on their own land, to give them strength and mana. And her plan was always to build a hospital run by Māori, for Māori, so by Indigenous people, for Indigenous people, allowing a holistic approach to caring that incorporated tikanga, our cultural rights and norms, alongside our traditional medicines, all housed in one place, including allowing people that want the choice of using Western medicine to be able to be housed in one space. But she was forthright and determined in her pursuit for rangatiratanga, the ability to self-determine, and also political autonomy, as a reflection of a woman before her times. But she was also steadfast and believed that the way that we move forward as a people is to ensure that we have political voice, political nous, and we advocated fiercely for what was ours, for our ability to self-determine, and to ensure that no breaches of Te Tiriti of Waitangi will go unchallenged. And finally, I'm sure that you all know, we've got many amazing ordinary nurses doing extraordinary things. But Iri Hapiti Ramsden, the architect of cultural safety, we call it in Aotearoa kaiwhakahaere, is about ensuring that there's a sharing of power. Often, if you look at it in context, when you are a sick patient being cared for by the nurse, the power imbalance shifts. The nurse holds the power over the care of a patient. Often, therefore, we can assert our views, our impressions, our values onto the person less vulnerable. What Iri Hapiti Ramsden's model is about sharing of power in the relationship. It's about, if you don't understand the person or the culture in which you're about to engage in, take some time to reflect on your own biases so they don't reflect on the decisions that you make for the person that is less vulnerable than yourself. This is about sharing of power. And if you look at back, all that we are trying to achieve by asserting our rights to shared governance at a political position, at a political level, is replicated in the way that Iri Hapiti's cultural safety and kaiwhakahaere is reflected. Unfortunately, what we see in Aotearoa is a dilution of that. And so what we pick up later on when we do a legal challenge against the Crown is we actually start to challenge the rights to reclaim all that has been lost and diluted through systemic change. So we are a bunch of nurses. Our organisation has a Maori governance group called Te Pōwari, the board. We are made up of representatives around our 11 areas, as our country is divided up into 11 spaces, from the far north to the deep down south. We have a representative whose role it is to articulate the concerns from the members, whether it be nursing concerns, professional concerns, or just concerns with the way our communities are being represented in health. You may or may not know, and it might come as no surprise at all, that unlike other countries, or the same as other countries, sorry, our Indigenous people are overrepresented in poor health outcomes. You can look across cancer rates. We are poorly represented in positive outcomes. Heart, diabetes, we're the same. Our statistics are the same. So something is not working if we continue to be in this perpetual state of poor health. Our nurses that work on the coalface see this time and time again. Hugely traumatizing, hugely difficult to make change in a system that doesn't recognize your voice, that operates still under a Western model of caring that doesn't recognize the rights and alternative ways of caring. In 2008, we took a claim. Ngāti Nagel, whom is also one of those ordinary women doing amazing things, took a claim to the government and said, if I'm a nurse working within a Māori and iwi provider, so that's an Indigenous service provider, I get paid up to 25% less than my colleagues that work within a hospital setting, a government-run organisation. Surely that can't be fair and that can't be equitable. We do the same job. We are expected to have the same annual practicing approved every year. But there is notably a huge difference in the pay and also working conditions. Now in 2008, they took a claim to the government and 11,000 strong petition. The government and a Māori Health Select Committee investigated it and said to the government of the day, there seems to be a significant problem here. It does appear that there is a gap. It is inequitable. Then we had an election and the government of the day said, we're not interested because what it looks like is it would require a significant amount of investment of new money going into fix an old problem. We're not interested, and vetoed the report. It never meant that the issue went away. In actual fact, what it meant is that we were just not talking about this group of people that were Indigenous women working for their Indigenous people, taking home up to $600 less than their colleagues that worked within a hospital setting under government. Now we proceeded to raise the issue. Eventually, we met some amazing people along our journey. Dr. Morna Jackson was one of them. And he said the issue is so significant, we should take it to the International Forum for Indigenous People at the United Nations. Now, we'd never been out of New Zealand, let alone to the United States, to make a claim on the world stage about how poorly our government was responding to this noticeably inequitable situation. So we did just that, because one thing you don't do in Aotearoa is you don't challenge your older people. So we went to the United Nations, and if you've ever been there, you'll realise how very difficult it is to make your point and provide solutions within 3 minutes. But that's what we did and continue to do. But the issue never went away, and we had significant earthquakes in Canterbury. And when we thought we were getting somewhere with the New Zealand government of the day, we got told surely the Māori nurses would not begrudge us going to use additional funds to improve the recovery of all of the victims and those that had died in the Christchurch earthquake. So we were used as a bartering tool. We were told, yes, your issue is significant now, but it's more important that we recover, or do you want that on your conscience? It's your decision. It was never our decision. It was an excuse from the government of the day. So back we went, finding our information, clarifying our data, and went back again to the United Nations to state yet another intervention. What it showed during our time is that the government of the day, past and present, doesn't actually appreciate the voice of Indigenous nurses. So we had to make a stand. Is this significant enough on a couple of areas? We've got a perpetual inequities that exists within a payment structure, a funding structure that the government chooses to ignore. Plus, if we heed the words of Kaiwhakahaere and Princess Tapuhi, then we need to be political and strategize to assert our ability to self-determine our tino oranga tiratanga. So along with another amazing wahine woman, we joined forces with Annette Sykes, a lawyer, and we took legal action against the Crown for their breaches to the rights of this workforce of Indigenous people. At the heart of our challenge was not just the breaches to the Treaty of Waitangi, Te Treaty of Waitangi, but the institutional systemic racism that has been enabled and persists and is real. And what it took to make that challenge was some very strong wahine Māori women to put together evidence to be able to present in a legal setting their stories that were real, that were emotional, and that talked about the significant, not just underpayment, but the way that Māori are being viewed in a Western healthcare system. The way that if you're supported and trained under a Māori, within a Māori school, that your qualifications are considered less important or valuable than if you trained in a mainstream school. The way that Māori are not given the opportunity to progress professionally at the same speed as their non-Māori colleagues. The way that our people are treated when they come in to hospitals differently from others. And as an Indigenous Māori nurse, there is nothing that you can do to change a system that is deeply entrenched on these views and embedding this conscious bias, these racist assumptions. So what our nurses did is bravely stood up in front of, and at times their employer, facing the Crown and the Crown's legal representatives, and they told their story. There was power in the story that they told. So much so that the nurses had quite a significant contribution to the final report that was made. So this claim was known as the Kaupapa Māori Health Inquiry, the Waitangi Tribunal 2575. And in 2019, the recommendations came out and significantly acknowledged the fact that the Crown continues to breach their obligations through the legislative framework that we currently operate under in New Zealand, through the policies that are implemented, and through the systems that operate. Māori and Māori nursing has been significantly compromised. And as a recommendation, the Crown, the Waitangi Tribunal, wanted significant changes to be made. We had said that the Crown has failed to ensure pay equity for Māori nurses and nurses working for Māori and iwi providers, that's Indigenous providers. We had said that the Crown failed to recognise kaupapa Māori. It failed to assist with the facilitation of Māori models of health. It failed to provide holistic models of funding. And it failed to stem racism and structural discrimination. It failed on so many areas. It failed to ensure cultural safety was implemented, which is also an obligation of our regulatory body. It failed to fund Māori-led initiatives. It failed to assist with the education of Māori nurses. So our claims were significant. And when these nurses went back to their day jobs after giving evidence, they are the silent heroes, the unspoken voice. But what the recommendations in the report finally did is it created change. So in New Zealand at the moment, we are facing some exciting opportunities, a health reform. We have now, after the ministry and government reference this Y2575 Waitangi Tribunal recommendations, what we've seen is now the development of a Māori health authority alongside a New Zealand health system. And in that Māori health authority, it will empower Māori through a funding model to implement initiatives that support hauora or holistic Māori models of health and well-being. It will develop a monitoring mechanism to ensure that our people don't continually be reported against, but no initiatives done to heal their body and their souls and their minds. And more importantly, it will address a procurement issue that has enabled through legislation the perpetuation of Māori working within their iwi provider groups, within Māori organisations, to continue to be underpaid, under-recognised. So this year is an exciting year for us because the announcements have been made. And we are more than certain, after speaking with some of the politicians, the persistence that the Māori nurses placed on giving evidence has created change. The political action by taking this further and raising the issues have been pretty much a dream of Princess Tapuhi's, to ensure that we are more politicised, more strategic, articulate, and able to represent and advocate for our people. So that's a significant movement that we feel is going to empower our system. Along with that, we made another challenge to the Crown. What we've seen is that the Crown's interventionist welfare policies have resulted in a disproportionate number of Māori children being removed from their family, their whānau, and placed into state care. where they experience various forms of abuse. The resulting harm suffered included physical and mental related issues, increased risk of suicide, substance abuse and addiction, inferior quality education, a lower socioeconomic status, and increased risks of incarceration. So primarily, we saw for Māori an increased placement of our children being placed into state care. Māori were then dislocated from their traditional lands and from their whānau, and they often suffered a loss of cultural identity and language, the impact of which is apparent across generations, this intergenerational harm. So part of being party to that, the children uplifts, we also partnered to take a claim against the Crown, again for their breaches in their ability to protect our most sacred of people, our children, our taonga, our treasures. This was known as the Oranga Tamariki claim under urgency. What prompted this is that we had filmed evidence of a young girl that had and was about to have been served papers, and her baby was going to be ripped from her as she sat in the maternity ward barely 24 hours after a caesarean section. The significance of this event meant that for the first time, members of the public could actually see the heart-wrenching events that commonly occur for Indigenous peoples. If you can't prove, if a social worker can prove that there are health and protection orders or issues, actually they don't even have to prove it. If they assume that there is health and protection issues, they can write a court order and the judge can order the uplift of that child. And once they become under a vulnerable child and under the care and protection of a service we call Oranga Tamariki, it's very difficult to get them out. So as a midwife, I joined the claimants in the Oranga Tamariki under urgency. And the reason for that is, as a midwife, I'd seen many young women give birth to babies. Didn't mean to say that they were dysfunctional. They weren't your conventional family unit. They may not have had a partner, or they may have had a partner that was no longer directly involved or supporting them, but they had a significant other in family. But a lot of those children, those young mums, part of the system that we worked under meant that there was discussions that were happening about them without them. So care and protection issues that somebody felt might have been a problem and issued a concern to Oranga Tamariki agency could see that child uplifted, even without the mother knowing. That's wrong on many levels. So taking the claim and joining the forces and telling the stories of what I'd seen as my time as a midwife was significant, because as an advocacy role for young mothers, the system was broken and definitely needed to be changed. We're not at all saying that there may be times where care and protection is an issue, and certainly the baby needs to be put into care. However, we can't generalise, and when you look at the amount of Māori children that were being uplifted, it was phenomenal and it was unacceptable. So the recommendations that came out from the tribunal around that also looked to move and raise significant concerns about the broken system and the amount of Indigenous people, children that have been uplifted, the amount of deaths that have happened against young children that when they've been in state care, the amount of children that have been adopted and taken out of the country that our system does not follow up, the amount of children that have been displaced and disconnected from their culture, and we don't know where they are. We call them the lost children. It's not fair, it's not right, and it's not just. So one of the things that we were encouraged by is the recommendations that came out of the tribunal significantly supported a huge overhaul. So again, another triumph against a system that we call a health and well-being system that actually, unfortunately, was perpetuating these incredible inequities and heartbreak. Finally, one of the last challenges that we are making is in what's called a Manawahini Claim. So mana is about strength, wahine is woman. So it's breaches from the crown that have not enabled us to be the strong woman that we are. And that is where systemic racism has an unconscious bias with a white privilege, or white fragility, has stopped and limited the progression of wahine Māori. What we have to concede, what we have to acknowledge in a tribunal case like this is that before colonisation, we were strong women. We had a political mind and savvy. And that since colonisation, it has negatively impacted on our ability to aspire to be. And that is where we are in the early stages of supporting that, progressing that claim right now. A hugely exciting place to be, because it means that we're shoulder to shoulder with some amazing, strong women. So in terms of where we're up to and how do I answer the last question around providing a safer place and strengthening up where we've gone to ensure that there's a access to stronger care. One of the famous, they call it whakatauki, we call it, you could say, a saying from Princess Tapuhi was, if I dream alone. If we dream as a collective, we can achieve our dreams. So the work that our collective nurses do is to recognise where we've come from, draw on the strengths of our strong wahine Māori, the people whose shoulders we stand on today, take those and progress forward. Because as we started, we acknowledge the past, the present. We've got to plan for a future. That means it's better for our mokopuna, our grandchildren, and their grandchildren. And if all we can do is stand together and hold our ground, then that's a positive thing. The Rise Up video that we showed you had strong wahine Māori leaders, had traditional people that have since passed on. The pictures towards the end showed our nurses united in a cause initially about getting pay equity, but more greater than that, recognition as a Māori nursing workforce. And the symbolic thing about the video is that we were shoulder to shoulder at the end with Indigenous and non-Indigenous people that had a common cause, a common issue, and all saw and fought for justice and fairness and righteousness. And my gift back to you is the little two mokopuna that we're at the end are my grandchildren. And I think one of the things that we always remember, and from the amazing women that I work with, both in Te Puari, but also out there in our wider communities, is that we must never lose sight of our dream to ensure that the future of our mokopuna, our grandchildren, is an easier road than where we've come from. On that note, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thank you, Kerri. Thank you. I'm sorry that we can't open all microphones and be cheering, because I know people are doing that. That was the before times. We have to imagine it now. When Kerri, colleagues, when Kerri and Diana first signed on, you may have noticed, if you were on, it was black behind them because it was 6:45 tomorrow morning at that time. So not a bad way to start the day, Kerri. That's a profound series of messages you gave, and I'm sure, because you get asked all the time, it's work on the soul and the heart. So I really very much appreciate it. It is Indigenous Peoples Day here, as you as we've been talking about, Kerri, and thank you for being with us on this day. There are many Indigenous and non-Indigenous people on the call. Fellows of the Academy, teachers, ordinary nurses doing extraordinary things, as Ms. Nuku said. Union leaders, Linda Silas is on there giving cheers to you and other people you will know. I'm going to turn it to them in a sec. I would like to introduce Dr. Sylvain Brousseau, who is our president-elect and who will be happy to take questions in French. Sylvain, I can't see you, but there you are. Okay, thank you, Sylvain. To those watching, I'm sorry to, Tim Guest, our president, shared his regrets. He got pulled very much at the last minute to a meeting he could not get out of related to his actual job. So as our volunteer president, we have to be respectful. And our incoming Indigenous leader colleague, Kerri, who's been on our board before, Elder Eileen Laflamme, has also been called to a situation with someone who's dying today. And I said, no, you have to be, that's sacred work. So Kerri will understand. And before I turn it over, I just want to introduce Kerri. I believe that you met her before, but it's Marilee Naugistic, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Indigenous Nurses Association, and she was coming on from another meeting. Marilee, did you want to say hello? Are you able? Are we allowed? Can panelists speak, Alicia, or is it only written comments? I can't remember. Alicia, my dear, are you there somewhere?
Yeah, I can grant her access to speak.
Okay, do you mind, just so that she could bring a greeting to Kerri before we do some Q&A? Marilee's telling me how to do it there on the screen. Thank you, Marilee.
Should work now.
Okay.
Marilee?
Yeah, I'm here.
There you go. We can hear you.
Okay. Kerri, on behalf of my relations here in Canada and on behalf of all the ancestors and the elders whom have brought us here to us journey and our journey here with you, so very far away, yet our hearts are close, our minds are one, and our people are all together. I thank you for taking this time on where we celebrate today, National Indigenous Peoples Day here in Canada. I thank you from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of all my relations for bringing forward the information that you brought for us to make an informed decision as we move forward in these very important times under very unique circumstances. So that on behalf of all my relations, Chimiigwech, Chimiigwech, Chimiigwech. Thank you, Mike, for allowing me this opportunity, and to all of the panelists.
Oh, not at all, Marilee. Thank you for being with us. I'm sorry, Kerri, did I interrupt you?
Oh, I just said kia ora and thank you. Thank you for the welcome.
Thank you. Sorry. It's one of those things, where when you can't see body language, you don't mean to speak in what someone else is. So I'm going to quickly go through some of the questions. Kerri, if you don't mind, there's a few in the box, and I know there will be more. So from Sally Thorne, who's a senior nurse leader in academia and science from the West Coast. I'm sure that there are many of us on this session who aspire to be the best allies possible. As Kerri, Sally is a settler, same as me. Best allies possible for Indigenous colleagues and for the wider project of health and social equity. What advice can you offer us for how to ensure that our individual and collective efforts are as respectful, relevant, and constructive as possible in what is often a challenging and evolving context?
I think that's a really poignant question, because we do have lots of friends and allies, and that's really important for us to have those friends and allies. One of the struggles that I see is that we're not at the table, we're not invited into the places where our voices have got meaning or context. And the important thing we can't do as an ally is speak for us. So we live the world that we do. We see the world through the eyes in which we have. We feel from the heart in which we've got. And to represent that requires us to be in that space. So as a friend and an ally, if you can create the opportunities to allow Indigenous people to have that space and time, that's really important, to ensure that you're not speaking on behalf of us, but we are speaking for ourselves, is incredibly important. And often we see people that would want to jump in and protect. Sometimes the important thing about is not to do that, is to allow the conversation to permeate and to allow the conversation to be a little bit contentious. I personally don't think we can honestly get to a point where we're having an honest, robust discussion unless we allow the room to feel a bit uncomfortable. Often people don't like silences, don't like uncomfortable situations, but it is about allowing that to come out and being safe, being there to support, not dominating the relationship. When we were going through the tribunal hearings, it was encouraging to have people to say to us, we believe in the principles of self-determination. We believe in the role and the leadership positions that you have. How can we help and enable you to do that? Having a comrade standing behind you that is not, or alongside of you that is not of your same culture, is hugely powerful. It sends strong messages to other non-Indigenous people. So I think holding hands, being side by side, not dominating the relationship is incredibly important. Allowing the space, the opportunity, and the way that we engage to occur and the way that we do is incredibly important. Important for the both relationships comes back to the how do you share power, how do you not dominate the power in place. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Kerri. Great answer. From Linda Silas, who is the president of the Canadian Federation of Nurses Unions. I'm sorry, colleagues. You're an amazing storyteller, historian, and strong leader, Kerri. My question is, how did the New Zealand Nurses Organization build on the shared power, or I guess build shared power at your board table? What was the process?
Kia ora, Linda. Lovely to connect. So our organisation is incredibly old, and as I said, it's the largest organisation within Aotearoa, and we have adopted a bicultural partnership. That doesn't mean to say it comes easily. We had a rule book that we used to operate under, and we moved away from there into a more power sharing kind of arrangement where we have myself as the Kaiwhakahaere that sits alongside the president. So we both have equal responsibilities to govern the whole organisation, except the way that I am elected is by Māori members. So my integrity, my standing within Māori communities either defines my ability to stand and represent the voice for them, or they'll vote me out. That's how that operates. So I have an obligation to all organisation, but I have also an added important role to be the voice for our Indigenous 4,000 members. That transition happened in constitutional change, happened in 2011. And it wasn't without its fair share of hate and not an easy transition, because people felt that they were giving away power and control to Indigenous people. Again, it comes back to the sharing of the power and the way that the work is valued. But it did create some huge tensions. Now in 2021, and I'd say comfortably within the last 3 years, that's how long this has taken to actually truly embed this within our nursing organisation. Now we are moving at a faster pace. Our issues, while they're similar, we can take different approaches to get there, all the same but totally different, but the outcome is still the same. So our rights and our ability to practice differently for our members, recognising their Indigenous ways of engagement, their Indigenous ways of consultation, has been only recently, in the last 3 years, really truly embraced. But it did take some very strong opposition from people that did not see the value in power sharing. But we've had, excuse me, a Labour government who has been quite progressive in trying to embed, or seemingly to embed, a more bicultural way of working and a more commitment to the implementation of Te Tiriti Waitangi. So as a health organisation, it only seemed right that the principles of Te Tiriti and upholding that and embedding a more bicultural way of working within the nursing organisation, it only seemed the right thing to do. But it's taken an incredibly long time for it to become business as usual.
Thanks, Kerri. Kerri, this question is from Ella Ferris, who's one of the more senior nurse executives in the country, just recently retired. I don't think I'm giving away state secrets, Ella. She's famous, spent a long career in tertiary adult care in urban downtown Toronto. Kerri, thank you for sharing your valuable insights and lived experience and teaching us of the journey and resilience of the Indigenous nurses and people of New Zealand and around the world. What is the one thing, this is a big question, Ella, what is the one thing that nurses around the world can do to stop the injustices that we've heard of today? Then she says, keep up your amazing work changing lives. So what is the one thing, it's a big question for you, Kerri, at 8:15 in the morning, that nurses around the world can do to stop the injustices you've been talking about?
I think we have to be present with conscience. The issue that we feel is that we know that to be our motto as an organisation is to be free to care and proud to nurse. Caring to us is about allowing the person to determine the appropriateness of engagement. If we want to be truly free to care, the caring is what the patient determines care looks like. So to be present and conscious means that I've forgotten the word, it's too early in the morning. Deconstructing those barriers that allow them to be free or to determine care for themselves is what it is our role to do. To be the best advocate, I could say, is equally important. But I don't think we consider enough, because of the workloads, the pressures that we're under, I don't think we consider enough what it is to be present with the patient and conscious of what they're wanting. The unspoken language, the body language, the conditions. I don't think we truly embrace it enough. I was talking to a colleague recently, and I know and they know that when you stop and you give time to a patient, the value that that creates, the relationship that that cements. But in actual fact, nursing today doesn't allow you the time to do that. So we often ask questions or phrase questions in a way that we know what the answer is going to be, because then it won't impinge on our time to get on and do the next job. But if we are truly to be present with the patients, understand what it is, then I think we can be a better advocate going outwards. But that was a really tricky one for, it is 8:15 here.
Well done. Kerri, on the political front, could you comment on, you've said a number of times, we took to court or we went to the UN. I'm assuming you mean the New Zealand Nurses Organization as a whole. Is that correct?
So when I talk in the we, I talk in the collective, the Māori Governance Board. I think when I went as a representative of them, because I talk about we, because I stand on the shoulders of the tipuna that my tipuna, but also I take the hearts and minds and energies of the people who I'm advocating for. So when I said we went to the UN and we took a legal challenge, it is on behalf of our Māori arm of the organisation, our board, the Te Puari. And I also took with me a couple of friends and colleagues, Tracy Morgan, Pari Tutari, on different occasions, to support me, because it's a lonely place to be in the middle of the States. But it is a collective we that I talk about. But our organisation, as I'd said in the answer to Linda's question, our organisation wasn't ready for change, and we couldn't wait for them to be ready or to feel comfortable. So when I said we took legal action against the Crown, it was our queer, our elder that supported the funding for us to take a legal challenge against the Crown. A round figure would be almost $40,000 for us to make that challenge against the Crown through the kaupapa hearings, and subsequent claims are also around that target. But our organisation in its entirety, while it supported it in principle, wasn't necessarily ready to support it financially, but we couldn't wait. And so sometimes you can't wait for people to catch up. It might have been years down the track. As I said, Ngāi Nagel took this claim in 2008, and those nurses still have not seen equity in their pay. So we couldn't stop and wait for people to catch up. We needed to make a claim, and our elder supported us in our ability to do that. But when I talk about we, it's about the collective we of the Māori arm of our organisation.
And Kerri, as we embark on this anti-racism work on a number of fronts in Canada, because as you know, we've also, the mirror that we've been holding up is not as pleasant as we had led ourselves to feel for a long time on many fronts. How have you, or have you used formal elected officials to champion you? Do they speak in Parliament for you, or is this just a nursing thing that is lobbying totally from the outside? Do you know what I'm asking?
So the bottom line is, when we've always lobbied members of Parliament and then cross parliaments. And we know that what's required is we really need to lobby hard the Minister of Finance. But there are so many other priorities that in some ways, and you may or may not have heard that 2 weeks ago, our nurses, we have 30,000 nurses that work within the District Health Board, and we took our first strike in 3 years. And this was about trying to be recognised, pay parity with other genders, And also it was about raising the hourly rate that nurses get paid within a district health board, because it is significantly underfunded, but also it's under-resourced. We have, like we all do, international workforce shortages. So we took that claim. The issue that we've had is that with the politicians that we've tried to bring along, they are all very sympathetic. Like the politicians that came out when we did strike action 2 weeks ago. They're all very sympathetic, but the money's the problem. So we've had people along, it's done no good. They're not the people that can be the change makers. They undermine and underestimate the value of nurses as Māori Indigenous nurses and the impact that that has on Indigenous communities. So we have tried very much to get people alongside. Now we've had to force external political action. It's a strategic approach, a multi-pronged approach to raise people's consciousness, to tell the stories of our nurses, to make sure that their voice is always present in any of our magazines that we put out, in any of the newspaper articles. We are always present telling our stories so that members of the public can see that there is a visible difference between not all nurses are paid the same, not all nurses are recognised the same. But we have had our fair share of racism and attacks. And I'm sad to say that internally, we've had quite a significant attack on Indigenous leaders within our own organisation from our own members. And that's been a very public debate, or not debate, it's been very public attacks on social media and attacks and threats to life. So we're not without our faults, and we've certainly have been attacked many times on social media by some very well-known nurse leaders. But the fight is about the long game. And as I said through the kōrero, the conversation, is that if we gave up at the first fight, there's no point being here. There's no point being a nurse if you can't continue to advocate. If somebody's going to threaten your life, they're empty words. We need to progress and ensure that the safety of our children, the future of our workforce, the future of our community is more important than threats.
Mike, you are mute, Mike. Sorry.
Is it easier to hear me when it's off? Kerri, you had shared that with me before. I was stunned, I have to say. We have formidable disagreement, I think, in our country on a number of fronts, but not like that. And I remember when I first took the job, the Marilyn Agisik, who just spoke, my first meeting was with the Indigenous Nurses Association, quite purposefully. And Marilee said at the time, you know, there'll be many days when we disagree on all kinds of things, and we're still going to be agreeable at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's never been shaken. And I hope that that continues, because the conversations, as you said, are very tough. And, you know, you've got to look deep in your soul when you're on my side, I think, of this not argument, of the challenge that's on the table. Kerri, I'm going to wrap us up. I'm just sending, there was a couple of questions about Indigenous nurse recruitment and patient care. So I'm referring those folks to the Canadian Indigenous Nurses Association. Marilee, I wrote it wrong as CINA.ca, and I know that it is, I'm going to put it in right now, indigenousnurses.ca. There it is, colleagues. So Kerri, it seems thank you doesn't seem enough for the sort of profound intervention that you've offered, first to our board and staff a couple of months ago, well, March now, I guess it was, and now again today. And it's been such an honor for us to have this time with you. I guess I'm embarrassingly fanboying around Kerri ever since we had lunch in a very exotic restaurant in the middle of the day in Singapore, which obviously means we weren't at the meetings we were supposed to be at. But I was so struck by some of Kerri's story and the story of, meaning the story you've heard today, that I always had in mind, how can we bring that to bear on our decisions? So I want to thank you, Kerri, for joining us. And I'll speak on behalf of there's still 50 on. We were up at higher than that a while ago, people that are on the call, and thank you sincerely for this incredible gift. I will thank you offline again. We also will be with you, as I understand, to celebrate the Maori New Year, which our board and other guests are coming to. We wish we're going to watch in about 2 weeks, and that's a tremendous gift to us. So thank you, Diana. If you're still there, I can't see the whole screen, for all you've done to help connect us, and thank you both for doing it at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I know it's now 8:30 tomorrow morning your time. Thank you all who joined us. It was great to see such a strong turnout, and loved having you with us. I saw a lot of talk back and forth in the chat, so thank you for being with us. And just as we go, I will invite you to tune in to the next public presentation is by Elder Aline Laflamme, which is on the autumnal equinox in September. It must be the 20th or 21st, I can't quite remember. And then the Honorable Maurice Sinclair, who many of you will know was the lead of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, is our ambassador in the fall, and he'll be speaking on December 1st. So we hope you'll tune in to all these events. And with that, I'll let everyone go. I hope your afternoon is great. I hope the day is great tomorrow for us, Kerri and Diana. It's always so strange to imagine it's Tuesday morning. Alicia, is there any more business we need to do before I like to follow the rules? Alicia says, nope, N-O-P-E. Okay. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Kerri. Thank you, Diana.
Thank
We'll see you.
Good day.
Thank you. Take good care. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
So Sylvain and Alicia, and I don't know who else from our team